Hello and welcome to Powergrids. Before we get started, let's take a quick look at the pause menu. This is where you can go in to adjust music and sound levels so that if you want to play the game, say while listening to a podcast or some music that's on your iOS device, you can do that right here at any time. I've also added an input select switch, which allows you to toggle between the standard tap mode and a tap and confirm mode, which has been added to make it a little easier to play the game on smaller screens. I'll touch on that a little bit more later and show it in action. For now, let's focus on the basics. Powergrids is a game about resource management, and the one resource that you really care about when playing this game is power. You start each game with 50 power, which is the most you can ever have, and 100 squares to reveal on the grid. It costs 1 power to reveal a square, so as you can imagine, at a certain point, you need to obtain more power somehow. The way you do that is to select a square on the grid that's been revealed, and then release it to drain the squares surrounding it. Now, there's two things you need to keep in mind when doing this, one of which is that the act of draining the square takes 5 power. So you always need to make sure you have at least 5 power so that you can get more power from the grid by draining squares. The other thing you want to consider is that the square that you drain doesn't actually give you anything. So you always have to look at the squares around the square that you're draining. For example, here we have 3 4s and a 1, so that's going to be a gain of 8 power because it's 13 minus the 5 that it costs to do the drain. And once you get that basic idea down, the gameplay becomes actually pretty simple in a lot of ways because it just becomes a matter of watching how much power you have. You can see here we're under 10 power, so the power indicator is turned yellow to note that we're getting close to the minimum amount of power. Here you see we're actually at 5 power, which means if we don't drain some power immediately, we're going to lose our ability to do that, and that'll be a game over. So you basically want to keep an eye on your power, look for opportunities on the board to select squares to be drained that are surrounded by squares that are of high value. Obviously, the best thing you could do would be to drain a square that is surrounded by 4s, because that's going to give you the most power possible for that drain. Now, there's something else you need to keep in mind while playing, which is that any power that you leave on the grid, in other words, any revealed squares that you don't drain, turn into points when you get to the end of a level. So you'll find that a lot of times you'll see games that start with very small scores, and then as soon as you clear the first grid, in other words, as soon as you reveal all the squares on that grid, the score will jump up considerably because that's where all of the power that was left on the grid gets converted into score, as you can see here. So once you get the basic gameplay down, one thing that you can do to add some more challenge to the game and to kind of mix things up a little bit is to try enhanced mode, which is available from the main screen whenever you launch the game. Now, in enhanced mode, the key difference is that there are 4 types of enhanced squares that can appear on the board. You can see 2 of them here, the power shot in the upper left-hand corner and the power bomb there in the middle of the squares that have been revealed. Power shots allow you to select 3 squares directly and gain the benefit of them for free. So basically, when you activate a power shot, you'll see those crosshairs come up on all the squares, and you can just directly drain high value squares without any penalty, which means you can basically just suck up power off the grid without having to spend any power to do it. The other square that you see here, the bomb, is a bit of a risk-reward square, because if you activate the bomb, you'll gain 100 score, but you'll lose 10 power. So if you're low on power, you definitely don't want to activate these bombs, but if you have a surplus of power, you can activate them to gain score much faster than you otherwise would. Now, there is another thing to keep in mind, which is that if you leave these power squares on the board, when the level ends, they're worth 25 points. So you still can get some decent score by leaving them in place. It's just that you get more if you activate them. So here's another of the 4 power squares, that being the lightning bolt, which is the power boost. When you activate that square, you get plus 10 power. So it's in addition to what you would get from the drain normally. Here we also see the power surge. Now the tricky thing about this square is when you activate it, you will randomly affect 10 squares on the board. And how that can be bad is in this case where I hadn't used that power boost yet, but by activating the surge, it actually removed that square from the grid before I had a chance to use it and gain the benefit from it. So the rule of thumb with power surges is that they're really good to use early on when you're trying to first reveal the grid, but once you have valuable squares exposed, you usually want to make sure that you interact with those first before using the power surge, just so they don't get accidentally blown out before you are ready to use them. In this case, luckily we had a power shot to work with to go and drain some extra power and get what we needed to reveal the rest of this board. And jumping ahead here to the end of the level, you can see I've revealed some bombs, and I only have a few more squares to reveal to finish this level. And I've got just enough extra power that if I drain a little bit from the board, you see I have enough where I can trigger the bomb effect, which will give me that 100-point bonus, which I'll do here just so you can see it. Keep an eye on the lower left there. You see the bomb gets triggered, score jumps up, and now I have 10 power less than I would going on to the next level, but it's still a net gain because of the tremendous amount of extra score I got for triggering that bomb. So one thing to keep in mind is when you clear a level, you get a 25 power bonus. You'll notice that's true in classic or enhanced mode. So even though I only finished that level with a handful of power, I still get to start this next one with a fair amount because of that 25 power bonus. So here we see a case where the power surge is actually used to better effect. I get it right away at the beginning of the level. I use it to reveal the fact that there's a power boost down here in the lower left. And now I'm carving out the surrounding area to make sure that when I do activate that power boost, I get the most out of it. You could do it in a few different ways. One thing to keep in mind about these special enhanced squares is that they activate whether they're at the center of the drain or not. So you don't have to, as I did there, make sure that it's a surrounding square to your drain. It could be the center of the drain and still work. So as you can see, I'm just revealing the rest of the grid here. That pretty much covers all of the 4 enhanced squares and what they do. And just to show that even though I don't have a lot of power here, with some careful management of the power and draining power as needed and being kind of careful about which squares I reveal in what order and taking advantage of opportunities to get more power, you might have thought at one point there, oh, this is a level that I can't beat because I only have single-digit power and so many squares to reveal. But as you can see, just taking some time to think about where I'm going to reveal squares, where the opportunities to get more power lie, that allows me to work the board in such a way that I was able to wait for that opportunity for that power boost to come up, use that to get ahead and get more squares revealed. And now you can see I'm actually getting down to the wire where obviously I'm going to finish this level. I may not finish it with as much power at my disposal as I would like, but I was definitely able to make my way through the level even though I didn't have a lot of power at one point. Now, because of the random nature of the game, it's always to your advantage to try to keep as much power in your reservoir as you can, so that if you do come across a bunch of low power squares and don't get the opportunity to drain right away, you can still weather that and get to either another part of the board or another grid entirely that may have more power on it. So it's kind of a risk-reward mechanic, and that's a big part of the game in general, is just figuring out how much power you can afford to use to to reveal squares and move the game forward without risking running out of power before you get the chance to do more drains. So another thing I wanted to touch on are some more advanced techniques. For example, starting to reveal the grid near the middle as opposed to the edges. The key advantage to doing this is that you get the opportunity to move out in any of the 4 directions, so that you can find things like this perfect drain here with this one surrounded by 4s. That's obviously an ideal drain, so there's no question about wanting to do something like that when you see it. And you can see, because of the way that I revealed this, I have such a surplus of power now that I'm able to reveal a huge chunk of the board without having to make a drain. And that's really the way that you want to play the game for the most part. If you have 30 or 40 power at your disposal, you want to reveal a big chunk of the board so you can make the best decisions possible about which squares to drain. You don't want to have limited options when you're doing your drains. You want to have as many choices as possible so you can make the best one. So here, I just wanted to show off a little of the tap and confirm mode, which is new in this version of the game, that allows you to tap a square and then confirm or cancel that so you can see exactly which square you're going to activate. I know that people who had been playing on smaller screens like iPhones and iPod Touches had indicated that they've been having some problems hitting the squares that they were trying to hit all of the time, and this was the way that I came up with to address that. It may be not an ideal situation, because obviously when you get into the later stages of the game and you have less time to make each move, this may become a little bit cumbersome, but certainly for the first 5, 10, 15 levels, you'll have plenty of time using that mode to do what you need to do. So the last thing I wanted to touch on here before we wrap this up is the idea of achievements. The game has 20 achievements in it, and while a fair amount of them are based on simple things like just attaining a certain amount of score in a certain mode, there are some achievements that if you read them and go after them, they'll help you to focus on certain aspects of the game that'll help you become a better player, like seeking out the perfect drains, using the power shots, and using the other abilities in enhanced mode. And by doing those things, it should help you improve your game, so that's something to keep an eye out for.
Now you have the power.